So despite all of the hype, Black Myth Wukong is a relatively unknown game when it comes to the fact that it is the first in the franchise and it is coming from a pretty unknown developer in Game Science. And there is a lot of really important details to this game that not only people need to know, but they've also kind of gone under the radar in a lot of cases. And so today I wanted to cover 5 super important details to know about Black Myth Wukong. Now, the first thing that I think is really crucial to know about this game is that it is a linear game, not an open world game. One thing that a lot of us, myself included, kind of gathered from initial trailers and stuff, even a lot of the gameplay that's been out for around 3 years now, was that the game does look somewhat open world. There are linear sections, of course, but a lot of the stuff that we saw looked like it was going to be a little bit more in line with what we will typically see in an open world game. Well, that is not the case at all. It is actually going to be very linear and much more in line with games like, for example, God of War, The Last of Us, and even games like Stellar Blade and the Jedi franchise like Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, with those two franchises, Stellar Blade and the Jedi franchise, being a lot more similar to Black Myth Wukong, not only in terms of the linear elements, but also the gameplay and stuff is actually going to be pretty damn similar to both of those games. Now, a lot of people might see that as a negative, and don't get me wrong, I love open world games. That is probably my favorite genre of game. Those big open world RPG type of games, Skyrim, Red Dead Redemption 2, Elden Ring, those are by far my favorite type of game, but that does not make linear games bad at all. There's a lot of games in my top 10 of all time, both of the recent God of War games, both of the Last of Us games. They are all in my top 10, and all of those games are very, very linear. So it does not mean that a linear game is going to equal a bad game. With that being said too, there is confirmed to be a lot of side content and a lot of areas to explore that are off the beaten path and stuff like that. So it's not going to be entirely linear. It's not going to be as simple as A to B, where we just have to follow exactly the path that the game wants us to. There is going to be stuff that we can choose to do as well, even hidden bosses and stuff like that. This boss that you guys are seeing on screen, this is confirmed by some journalists who have had their hands on the game already to be an optional boss. So this boss is missable. They are off the beaten path, and that proves that there is going to be a lot of other stuff to do outside of just the main path, which, as I said, will be linear rather than open world, like a lot of us probably expected it to be. Now, something else very crucial to know, in my opinion, is to do with the progression of the game. Obviously, games like this that are a little bit more linear and they're more story-driven sort of combat games, sometimes they do have progression, but sometimes they are literally just a story and there is really no, upgrades and stuff like that for your character. That is not going to be the case in Black Myth Wukong. It is confirmed that there are skill trees in this game. There is going to be 3 separate skill trees, and so there is going to be full progression that we can upgrade our character and stuff like that. Now, one of these skill trees is based on essentially passive upgrades, so stuff like health, stamina, all those sorts of things. That is going to be in the first skill tree. There is then also one for magic and transformations, which, if you don't know what the transformations are, I'm going to get to that a little bit later on in this video, as that is also a very crucial element of the game. But that is going to be in that second skill tree. And then as for the third one, that one is going to be focused on your staff, so essentially the combat and the different stances that are in this game too. So there is going to be plenty of stuff to upgrade. We are going to be able to make Wukong get stronger as the game goes on and unlock some awesome new abilities. Now, before we go any further, if you guys are new to the channel and you are interested in more Black Myth Wukong content, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. There is plenty more content on the way, both in the lead up to launch and plenty more after as well, so make sure you don't miss out. Now, I just briefly mentioned the stance system, and this is going to be a pretty crucial element of the combat when it comes to Black Myth Wukong. It is confirmed that the game is going to have 3 separate stances for us to use. The first of which we will obviously have unlocked straight away. This is called the Smash stance, and this is being touted as pretty much just the regular stance, or the jack of all trades. For lack of a better word, this is going to be just the regular combat. There is then also the second stance, which it is confirmed will unlock this around level 20, unless of course they do change that by the time the game launches. And this second stance is called the Pillar stance, which allows Wukong to pretty much use his staff in a slightly different way, as you guys can see in some of the gameplay here. One of these abilities allows us to actually kind of extend that staff and then climb to the top of it, which allows us to avoid any damage that will be taken on the ground, as well as then sort of unlocking different movesets, including what looks like a very heavy attack here. And on top of that, it is going to add a little bit more range too, because like I said, that staff becomes a bit extended compared to its normal shape. And so this is going to be a pretty different stance, and I'm very keen to get my hands on it. As for for that third stance, they haven't said anything about that just yet. They are seemingly trying to keep that a little bit under wraps. Even the people who have played the game earlier said that they weren't able to use that third stance. So no one really knows what this is just yet, but I'm very keen to get my hands on the game and figure out what that third stance is. Now, something else that I touched on earlier that I mentioned I would get to later in the video is the shape shifting mechanic. And this is, for me, probably the most exciting aspect of this entire game. This shape shifting mechanic is almost in line with the sort of ultimate ability that's on a long power up. So we can't just use this all the time. It is going to be pretty damn overpowered, and therefore they need to make sure that we aren't just spamming it essentially. But what this does is it allows us to actually shapeshift into the form of different bosses that we've already beaten along our journey. Essentially how this works is that each time you beat a boss, you will then unlock their form and essentially collect that. And that means that you can then use this shapeshift ability to pretty much transform into that boss for a small amount of time. For most of the ones we've seen gameplay of, it is about 90 seconds or until you take enough damage that it pretty much like kills that shapeshifted version of you and you transform back into Wukong. When you are shapeshifted into that boss, you can then use their weapons and abilities, at least to some extent. We're not too sure just yet if it's going to be every single ability and stuff like that, but it looks as though we can essentially combine Wukong and that boss into a completely different playstyle. And like I said, for me, this is easily the part of the game that I'm the most excited for. I was already so keen to fight all of these bosses, but now it's going to be even more exciting because each time we fight a boss, we just know that as soon as we kill that boss, we are going to be able to essentially play as them for little periods throughout the game. And that to me is very, very exciting. Now, a final huge detail in this game that you guys definitely need to know is the fact that there is no blocking at all in Black Myth Wukong. Now, there is going to be an ability later on that we can unlock through the skill tree that does allow us to briefly block ranged attacks. So that is a little bit of a lie that I just said, saying that there is no blocking at all, but that is just an ability. There's no regular block where you can actually just press a button and that allows you to block. That ability that I mentioned earlier is only going to be for ranged attacks. When it comes to melee combat, as in fighting bosses and stuff like that, there is no way to block incoming damage. The only way to avoid it is essentially just dodging. That is going to be our only form of defense. Now, obviously that's pretty different to how most games of this genre are. Usually games with like hand-to-hand combat using a staff or a sword or anything like that, they do allow you to block and parry and stuff like that. But like I said, this game does not have that ability, and that will throw a bit of a different dynamic into gameplay for those of us who are used to combat from games like the Souls-like games, or even games that I mentioned before in Jedi Survivor and Stellar Blade. It is going to be quite a bit different than the combat in those games because we simply cannot block incoming damage. So I'm very interested to see how that goes. I'm not too sure if everyone's going to love that, but I'm sure there are reasons for why they have implemented that into Black Myth Wukong. But that is going to do it for 5 huge details that you guys definitely need to know about this game. I'm excited to hear all of your thoughts, so be sure to leave them down below. Which of these mechanics are you most excited to see? But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.